this is Jessica Vaughn. Welcome to the next edition of Reclaiming My Mind. As with the last episode, I still have a bit of a cold, so if I sound funny on this episode, please excuse my voice. I'm hoping that by the next few interviews, I will have my voice back. Today, we are starting our second interview with our municipal candidates, and we have with us today another mayoral candidate, LaVaughn King. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, so I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you and hear about your platform because you've been one of the candidates I've had the hardest time finding information about. So I'm really excited about tonight. And generally what I like to do when I welcome guests on is first learn a little bit about them and their background and not just about what their political ambitions are. So tell me as much as you want to share about your background and kind of what led you to this point.
Alrighty. So on a more personal basis, I'm one of seven. I have one brother, 5 beautiful sisters. Growing up in Tampa, I participated in sports for the most part. I would say that's what I'm known for.
So you're born and raised in Tampa?
Yes, ma'am.
What part of Tampa?
Ybor City.
Oh, okay. So you're born and raised in Ybor City?
Yes.
Okay.
I attended Orange Grove Middle Magnet School of the Arts.
Oh.
6th grade, I participated in musical theater. 7th grade, I took up the band. I played the French horn. And 8th grade, I did chorus. And after leaving Orange Grove, I was accepted to Blake for chorus, musical theater. However, my parents told me that I should do something more definitive. So I ended up going to Tampa Bay Tech and enrolling in the automotive program that was there. So after about a year and a half of doing that, just came to the conclusion I won't be working on cars.
Not the best fit?
No, not exactly. It was a great learning experience.
Sure.
At this point, from that education, I can do your oil change and your taxes.
Right.
So after a year and a half of that program, I transferred over to the Business Management and Supervision program, where I became the FBLA President, Future Business Leaders of America.
Oh.
Among that, the French Club President, I was Student Government Vice President, captain of the soccer team, as well as the track and field team as well, where I won a bronze medal in triple jump. So that's more so the athletic resume. I went on to UF. I was blessed to walk onto the team there.
Oh.
My training partners at UF, they won gold and silver in the last 2 Olympic Games.
Wow.
So that was amazing. My biggest accomplishment per se was SEC honor roll. I actually never would have thought I would have gone to University of Florida. I was a Florida State fan my entire life. When I won my state title, actually, I had on FSU socks.
Oh.
So had you told me I was going to UF, I would have told you you're crazy.
So you crossed the line.
To an extent. There's a tag that says a house divided. I like to say I'm a heart divided for the most part.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you graduated from there?
Yes, graduated from the
with honors.
University of Florida with combined bachelors, one in marketing,
Wow.
and the other in information systems operations management. So I spent the last few years as a programmer analyst for the Alachua County Public School System.
Oh.
Yeah, so I supported the payroll and finance department for about 10 months prior to enrolling in graduate school, housing community economic development in the College of Design, Construction, and Planning at UF. And I initially put in a letter of resignation saying that I was just going to go back to school and focus on that entirely. However, they didn't want to lose me, so they opened up another position for me in the transportation department.
Oh.
So here I was studying housing and community economic development in the classroom and working full time in transportation as a systems analyst. So it was very useful work, very informative, and the information that I learned is transferable to leadership in the public capacity, as well as helping improve our roadways in the transportation networks that we have here. So that's a little bit.
And then what brought you back to Tampa? Because you were in Gainesville.
Yes. Okay. So once I once I got into graduate school, my first semester, my professor, Abhinav Alexandra, he was my urban economics professor and local economic development professor. And basically he expressed, you don't need a thesis to accomplish what you're trying to do or a degree, but you're going to need a lot of money. And so the only reason I even thought to enroll in the first place was because I want to construct a performing arts daycare that focuses on wellness, education, and the arts. So that's what I applied into the graduate school with. Then second semester in our thesis planning course, I also had the same professor for health in the built environment. And my focus was on obesity alleviation. And again, as I begin to articulate my expectations and work on crafting my thesis, she echoed his sentiments in saying, you won't need a thesis for this, but you'll need a lot of money. Plus, you don't have any design experience. So I decided to, 2 weeks later, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Payne came into my international development planning course and offered UF design and planning in Shanghai. So I jumped on that opportunity. I was actually the only American student from UF to represent UF in China. There, we spent the first 4 days in the city of Shanghai, which is about 30 million people. My roommate and I, we conducted a case study, historic preservation, and we compared the techniques used in Shanghai, China, to what was being employed in New Orleans, Louisiana. He attended the University of New Orleans, so that was our reference. The next few days, we toured other areas of China. One in particular, Suzhou. I believe it's known as the Garden City. This place is absolutely beautiful. I took about 3,000 photos in 2 hours. Yeah, it was amazing. I had never seen anything like it. And I think it really got my mind going as to what do we have at home that's this prominent, and what do we have that highlights our culture and history. And that really,
now, when you say home, did you mean Florida or Tampa?
Tampa,
okay,
in particular. Even the United States as a whole. For example, in the gardens in China, every single one is going to have rocks, water, and trees. The rocks symbolize our bones, the water symbolize our blood, and the trees symbolize the growth of our hair. And so we have Nike, just do it. And we're going about development in the capacity that we are at a rapid pace, whereas a lot of the things that they produce, they ensure that it has meaning and ensure that it's not only aesthetically pleasing, but functional at the same time. And I think at times here at home, we can lose sight, or we tend to focus on one more than the other. So it was great to see the illustration of that there. So upon returning from China, I actually got sick. Exposure to black mold. So I was out for about 3 weeks or so prior to returning to work with the Alachua County school system. And upon my return, my boss basically said, "Hey, how is China?" "Great," sharing pictures. "Okay, cool. We need you to work 20 hours instead of 40. So I just lost half my income basically.
Sure.
And in China, there's a bus pass. I actually have it in my wallet. It highlights being frugal. And usually at every station, you get different types, like different colorful art designs and things of that nature. But I actually got this same one 4 times. And it said, "Be frugal, be frugal, be frugal." And I didn't necessarily know what was at hand or what was coming. But once I returned and got that information from work, that was more so the confirmation as to why this was even applied in the first place. And so from there, I just began to transition out and make my plan as to what was going to come next. So it got to April of 2017. Sitting at my desk, and I just prayed to God. I said, "I can't do this anymore. What do you have next in store for me?" For the most part. So in that time frame, once I returned from my lunch break, I went to irs.gov and I applied for an EIN for an idea that I had called the Lovers Music Group.
Which is basically like your business license.
Basically, the poor man's method of doing so. And the Lovers Music Group is essentially going to become a record label. And that's how I intend to finance the nonprofit daycare.
Gotcha.
Yes, ma'am.
And you felt drawn to Tampa to do that?
No, absolutely. As I stated, the expectations of wellness, education, and arts. Wellness altogether, the federal government spends about $150 billion on obesity alleviation and the chronic diseases associated with that. So I feel as though if I can do anything on a public level to remediate obesity in any way, shape, or form from preventative capacity, we could utilize those resources for other things for the most part. And so that was my personal commitment, if you will. From the educational basis, 50% of none of our demographics are literate. So we like to publish statistics that compare whites to black to Hispanics and things of that nature. But if you look from a holistic basis, again, across the board, 50% of us are not literate. So just making education a priority. I think it's been overlooked in many capacities. And even having elected official in the city basis that makes education a priority, I think that's going to help fill in the gap where the educational and the county may fall short.
Sure.
So again, that's a personal interest of mine, as well as the arts. So with the proceeds from my debut album, it's called Dear Love Child, I've already committed $1 million to the redevelopment of the Jackson House, which is a historic landmark in downtown Tampa. I've already met with the oldest living descendants of the dwelling, Mr. Willie Robinson, last February, Black History Month. And I've made that commitment to him. So I'm working diligently to get that done as well. So yeah, that's wellness, education, and arts. And I felt as though, what could I bring as I return home? So if you look at my email or even my social media, it's branded as I Lead 2019. That's not a campaign. It's not about me. It's a charge and an expectation. It's derived from introspective leadership. So how am I leading? I'm an athlete, so I can impact wellness and public health. I've succeeded in education to an extent, so I can help improve our 50 underperforming learning institutions in Hillsborough County. And I'm a creative, and the arts could be utilized as an economic catalyst. Currently, we're bringing about $500 million, about $436 million in the arts sector.
When you say we, you mean Tampa specifically?
The Tampa Bay area, yes, ma'am. And so if we could do anything to increase our support for the arts, again, those are more resources that we could utilize to remediate the infrastructural needs, as well as many of our social issues like homelessness and poverty and things of that nature as well.
All right, so let me back up a little bit, because that was one question that led to a lot of ideas, which are exciting, and I'm excited to hear from them. And you're obviously very passionate, but let me try to get one at a time so I can talk about them a little bit more in depth.
No problem.
So you came back to Tampa. You have this passion for wellness, for education, and for incorporating the arts, and all of that is what I'm getting from that last conversation. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so you want to lead. I guess what my question would be to start off with is, jumping into a mayoral race is a big decision. What made you feel like that was a better fit than running for like a city council seat? What made you drawn to want to run for a mayor? Because is this your first race?
Yes.
Okay. That's a big step for a first race.
Yes, ma'am.
So what was, I guess that's what I'm curious to start with, is what made that the number one starting place for you?
Okay. As the old saying goes, when a wave realizes that it is the ocean. And I was, again, introspectively looking within myself to see how my abilities could complement and do the most good for the most people.
So it's impact.
No, absolutely. As well as offering a new perspective. Mark Cuban, we all know is a billionaire who's got his wealth from technology, has expressed how technology is the current age, but it will soon be the thing of the past. And creatives will be a necessity moving forward. So Aristotle basically states, where your talents and the needs of the earth lie, there lies your vocation. I have a background in housing, community, economic development. Not to mention, I thought I was just going to be a student in China. They gave me the project and I was offering the solutions. So again, that empowered me to an extent. Again, information systems and operations management was my background, speaks to the technology age, and then transportation. And they're all three needs here in the Bay Area. So I felt as though if I could at least help impart the vision and those expectations moving forward, that will put us in the best position as a city.
So you feel like you'd have more impact with the skill set that you bring to be a mayoral position than the impact you would have as a member of city council?
Absolutely. Not to mention, again, my intimate prayer in this process was the opportunity to influence public policy. So to an extent, as mayor, I would have to work directly with the legislative bodies, that is the council. And so it would, again, put me in the position to do that as well. And I could help remediate our old issues that derive from incomprehensive planning, if you will. We're still trying to connect St. Pete to Tampa via bus. With all due respect, that could have been accomplished in the 80s or 90s.
Well, I believe they're unleashing a ferry.
Yeah. All solutions are good. The fact that we're attempting to do anything to decongest, I'm a proponent for that. I would definitely say my transportation plan is more intricate and will require more cooperation on a regional basis, but it's definitely feasible.
So I know you sent me some stuff, and it's online with what you're talking about. And usually I ask people about their platform, and it sounds like, you're sharing it with us a bit at a time because it's a holistic plan. So I guess what my question would be is, I understand some of the holistic concept, right? I'm a huge believer in holistic in general, especially when it comes to medicine. That's a good example. A lot of Western medicine, you're just treating the symptom. A lot of Eastern medicine, you're kind of treating the whole problem.
Absolutely.
And I kind of get that feel for when you're talking about the issues, right?
Yes,
looking at the whole, not just one piece of it, but how it all interconnects together.
Absolutely.
But as far as listeners who that might be a little bit much for and want to know specifically about kind of focusing in on issues that affect Tampa Bay, transportation is a huge issue. It's one of the most talked about issues at all of the city candidates that I've talked to. What are some of the other specific issues? I know that you talked about tackling obesity. Now, when you talk about that, is that at a city level? Is that something that I'm imagining that you want to take nationwide? But what are your ideas when you talk about that at a city level, specific policies that you would implement in order to try to address that in your platform?
Well, in the health and the built environment course, there's basically, I guess you could say, buzzword or terminology, where the expectation is health in all policy. So if in fact we do commit to building a new lot or building a park or what have you,
right,
just to ensure that, again, that expectation of public health is still there. The South in itself is very auto dependent in its design, and so it's not conducive for walking or just naturally engaging in physical activity as we have been. For me, with my last name King, my mom would always call me Dr. King, and as a kid, you think more so from a health perspective, all doctors existing for the most part. But as you get older and you learn more about preventative methods and preventative measures and things of that nature, you understand how certain things can be remediated simply by, again, establishing that expectation when you're drawing up the plan and developing the policy from the beginning. Our population as a whole is graying as well. And retirees come to Florida to retire.
Right.
So I also think with collaboratives such as the Innovative Partnership and them having the Florida Hospital, Moffitt Cancer Center, all focusing again on reinforcing wellness in the Bay Area. I think we're already doing work to accommodate that future growth and those future needs of serving individuals and their health needs.
So one piece that I'm not necessarily hearing and that I'd like to know more about is because what I'm understanding
how I would implement it.
So what I'm hearing is that putting wellness at the forefront of all of your plans, you think would naturally have the effect of dealing with the obesity. That a lot of it comes from lack of exercise because of the way that we've become car dependent. So then my next question would be like, is there a nutritional standpoint to that? Is there policies that you're going to be talking about, maybe specifically in marginalized or low income communities where they might not have access to nutritious foods? And we've recently, like the Progressive Caucus recently had a meeting about food insecurity. And we learned about the fact that a lot of marginalized community are known as food deserts.
Yes.
And the access to just fruits and vegetables and a lot of the other nutritious foods that people who don't live in those communities take for granted aren't as accessible. Is that something that's a component of this?
I think that's, again, my personal work. I have been working in a community garden with the expectation of learning more about the vegetation itself and how it could be beneficial. As far as like a policy basis and implementing something to that effect, I've been consulting council. I've been consulting owners of various lots. Again, I grew up in East Tampa in a food desert about possibly changing some of the land use over to community gardens. But again, I think it's truly up to the people and their expectation. I work with Cornerstone. It's a nonprofit organization, and I'm what they consider a garden angel. And everyone's welcome to participate in it. Everyone's open to take the vegetation. But I think we've been so socially conditioned to eat certain things that are socially culturally appropriate. For example, here I am, a proponent for wellness, but I stopped by McDonald's on the way here because it was more convenient.
Right.
And so I think that's the side of the argument we could consider as well. If it were me, I would have community gardens everywhere and no grocery stores. But again, for some individuals, they're more acclimated to going to the big box stores and things of that nature. I don't think it's absolutely necessary in East Tampa per se. I think if we were to develop a community shared arrangement where we could develop a community garden, a centralized location in Jackson Heights per se, or Belmont Heights per se, that would be just as effective of having a big box retailer there.
So it sounds like something that's exciting to me, and I would imagine to a lot of our listeners, is, you have a lot of candidates, especially citywide, come on and, talk about the city, and they might mention, East Tampa a bit, but it sounds like a lot of your focus, since you grew up there, is about a lot of the underserved communities when you talk about your plan as being a mayor, and, how to service those communities as well. Where I hear a huge complaint from a majority of those communities is so many candidates come and they might have, a quick plan, or, something that they want to pander to that community in order to win their vote. But then as soon as they are elected into office, all of those communities are the last of their priorities. So what I'm hearing from you is a dedication. And when you're talking about your plans, the vision that you have for our city, it includes a lot of these communities that a lot of other elected officials aren't including realistically in their vision as an elected candidate. So is that something that I'm picking on that's correct? Do you feel like one of the things that might set you apart from some of the other mayoral candidates is your dedication to all of the communities in our city and neighborhoods?
Absolutely. I had a meeting with the chief this past Monday, and one thing I left...
The chief?
The former police chief, Jane Castro, my opponent, this past Monday. And I just kept it honest with her, as I stated, keep it candid. I told her plain and simple, I won't celebrate a dog for being a dog. So you putting on your uniform every day and going to work as you were sworn in to do and being an officer, thank you for your service, but that's what you signed up to do. I'm not going to praise a banker for being wealthy. Obviously, that's the outcome. That being said, upon my return to Tampa, I actually moved back 1 week prior to Hurricane Harvey. And I went out to Houston the Friday after the rain subsided and stayed 3 weeks to help with the demo and restoration. So I'm a roll up your sleeve type of leader, not just a good speech and a smiling wave for the most part. And to be completely honest, I've done more for East Tampa in this past year than probably majority of them have done in their lifetime. Worked in the community gardens. I've also provided mothers with different programs to help work themselves out, so the nutrition and the physical activity component. I've also mentored a group of young men under the leadership of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Embody, empowering males to build opportunities for developing independence. I also partnered with Iota Beta, and they had a job readiness training program which also led to a job fair that we had. And many of the youth actually left with jobs as a result of that. As I said, with my commitments to the arts, my $1 million commitment to the restoration of the Jackson House. As far as rights restoration, I walked over 150 miles on behalf of Amendment 4 and knocked over 3,000 doors on behalf of that amendment. And then not to mention, again, with the utilizing all of the information from the planning of designing and housing in China, I actually built and developed in Atlanta for 10 weeks while I worked on my album, to the demolition and restoration in Houston, and bringing all of that knowledge back to the Bay Area and how we can help.
So I love what you're talking about, because for me, and what I'm always talking about on the show and in all of our meetings, is the connection between all of us, right? And
Absolutely.
what progressives in general are fighting for is to make sure that, the middle class and the working class is flourishing and supportive of our entire system, right? If the middle class and the working class collapses, we can't function as a society. And we're always trying to talk about the issues and how they relate to everything else and being systemic. So we have to focus on our communities that get the least amount of support, especially as we develop and we gentrify, right? We need to make sure that we're not displacing people and we're talking about affordable housing. But I guess my question is for listeners who don't live in those communities, who might live out here in New Tampa, and I go to a lot of New Tampa meetings, who are very concerned about their community, or even people in South Tampa who apparently, according to our last guest, make up a huge voting block in the city Tampa elections. What's your vision for them as well when you talk about being a mayor?
Well, again, the seed started with wellness, education, and arts, and it expanded to so much more. So my platforms are inclusive communities, sustainable living, and economic growth. So inclusive communities looks like, again, wellness, education, and restorative justice. I've already been in dialogue with the Police Athletic League, which I mentioned in the last debate, about how we could put on more civic engagement functions from a physical activity perspective to, again, ensure wealth while ensuring health for the most part. And so I'm working diligently with them. Basically, the overarching expectation is to develop a community games, almost like the Olympics, and where we have our city compete on a regional basis, and we have a qualification, and then we actually go on and compete with other police athletic leagues like Clearwater, St. Pete, and that remaining area, the surrounding areas. As far as economic growth, I do want to increase the number of patents that we produce.
I saw that in your list. So tell me how you see that as connecting the dots to economic growth for the entire city.
Well, what makes a city is basically a cluster of independent economies. So say, for instance, I sell eggs, you sell milk, he sells bread, she sells textiles. At any given point in time, if any of those things were to be taken away, that would reduce the capacity of our economy. But by adding new products and new industries to the overarching economy, that's going to, again, bolster the city in itself. So when those new industries come about, new products and new inventions, then you're going to need new workers to make those accommodations. You're going to need new housing to accommodate the workers, and you're going to need new public services so they could spend their money. So,
But you're also going to need firms to invest in those ideas, right?
Well, with the David Straz, the likes of Vinnick, and also we have the resources available. I think one thing I did express, if we had kind of like a quarterly version of Shark Tank and brought about the ideas, we have invention clubs that are here. We have individuals that have larger number of patents, some hundreds so patents that actually live in the Bay Area. So I think we've come so contingent on so dependent upon consuming our economy as opposed to contributing to the economy. And so, again, I want to change that expectation.
Now, does the mayor control the number of patents?
No, not at all. But basically,
okay.
No. So I'm just basically
You're just talking about your plans in general.
Absolutely. So entrepreneurship, the base, one of the subsets of the platform. And if
So who regulates that? Because I'm naive. I don't know. Who regulates the amount of patents we can have? Is that on a national level?
I believe so. Yes, ma'am. I don't think there's a limitation. I think
so. You just want to encourage
absolutely
more
production, more creativity, and innovation from our local citizens. My expectation isn't to adopt America's next best practice. My goal is to create the world's next best practice. So we don't need Tampa eye because London and Orlando have an Orlando eye. Right. Let's come up with something that doesn't even exist yet. And this is what's going to attract individuals to Tampa as opposed to other cities in our region.
Got it.
Yes, ma'am.
So maybe instead of necessarily talking about the limiting the access of patents, you would promote maybe rewarding people for coming up with ideas or create some kind of competition where people are compensated, somehow drive more invention so that we become more of a thriving city based on innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. The East Coast version of Silicon Valley.
Gotcha. Well, my husband would like to hear that. So let me just go down some of the issues that the Progressive Caucus is really invested in.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I ask all candidates about this. So we've already talked about public education, right? And as someone who worked in the school system and kind of talks about education being at the forefront of your platform.
Yes, ma'am.
And specifically some of our underserved schools.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about, just in general, the current trend to privatize education by offering charter schools as opposed to fixing the public schools in neighborhoods so that parents feel that that's their only choice? Are you supportive of charter schools, or would you say you're more of a public school proponent?
I'm not anti-charter school. I'm definitely a proponent for public schools. Let's keep in mind, a lot of the issues that we are seeing in our educational system are a byproduct of not properly remediating education during the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. For example, once African American students were permitted to, integration and permitted to attend the same institution, mm-hmm. lawmakers weren't interested in sending Caucasian students to black schools. So they transport black students to the predominantly white institutions, mm-hmm. for the most part. This, again, didn't increase funds for the educational institutions in the black community.
Sure.
It just further isolated the students at a new institution, right. for the most part. Mm-hmm. And those same funds that were used to then transport the black student could have also been used to give back to the institution for
sure.
schools. So a lot of these things are byproducts of exclusivity mm-hmm. and Band-Aid fixes for things that really need social surgery.
Sure.
But I'm definitely a proponent for public education. I actually had a meeting with the alumni from Chamberlain High School yesterday. Majority of their student population, I believe about 87% of the families and the students there live below the poverty line. And so basically, I've been committed to them. They have a network. I'm not sure if I can disclose the name just yet, but it aligns with my expectation for Tampa's urban school. Mm-hmm. And so basically, again, with the city filling in where the county may fall short. And basically what that looks like is local congregations, local community leaders, and local small corporations all taking a vested interest in the students and their performance. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm in this zone or I live in a given proximity of this school, I need to have a vested interest in these students and their education. At the end of the day, incompetent students become incompetent members of our workforce, whether we like it or not. So we say, this is a county issue as opposed to a city issue, but when does it become a city issue?
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
So it sounds like you like the community model school.
Absolutely.
So the next question would be, would you say that you support LGBTA rights?
Again, yes, but again, I think there are some things that we proposed to be issues for the most part, when in actuality they're just opportunities. Mm-hmm. So I think culturally and socially, at least during Obama's campaign, a lot those rights were compared to civil rights to an extent. But if you think about it, African Americans still haven't even benefit to an extent as a byproduct of civil rights. So other demographics and other cultural groups and subsets have benefit from the minority label as a result of what took place during the civil rights movement. But there are still other things that could be, I wouldn't necessarily say take precedent, but could be considered prior to us.
Do you think LGBTA should have the right to marriage?
For me, in a spiritual basis, in my
whichever way you want to approach it.
So my personal belief and spiritual belief, I just think it doesn't necessarily align with life cycle, with the expectation of the Bible setting forth and multiplying. Mm-hmm. But within our social construct, two consenting adults and whatever they decide to do is between them and God at that point. It has nothing to do with me.
Do you believe that there should be laws to discriminate against LGBTA people in the workforce?
Oh, not at all. Again, as I say, a lot of things we try to make issues that aren't necessarily the case, and it all points back to exclusivity and trying to leave people out, as opposed to my expectation of inclusive communities altogether.
Gotcha.
Yes, ma'am.
And how about adult use marijuana? Are you a proponent of that as far as the state of Florida is concerned?
Yes. I'm pro the decriminalization of those impacted by marijuana, not necessarily legalizing the substance. So that being said, if we're doing the work to decriminalize the substance, we should do the work to decriminalize the individuals that are impacted at the same time.
I believe it's already decriminalized in the city of Tampa.
I'm just saying completely.
Right.
So if, let's see.
I mean, I use adult use because proponents of the medical marijuana industry has made sure I've used that as opposed to recreational marijuana. But right now in Florida, you can only have access to it if you have a medical marijuana card.
Yes, ma'am.
And a lot of times that's really a classist way of giving access to the drug, right? Because pretty much it's people who can afford a card and not necessarily people who medically use it. So are you a proponent of making sure that it's legal to a consenting adult? So I make sure to say adult use because people have corrected me to make sure that recreational doesn't sound that it has access to people who aren't, of age and a consenting adult. But if they wanted to basically make recreational marijuana legal in Florida, you'd be a proponent of that.
Yes, so it's a plant. It comes from the earth. If you wanted to go outside and obtain the plant, utilize it at your discretion, you should have that right. Again, a lot of the laws surrounding the criminalization of certain substances were racial to begin with. Yeah. So again, these are Band-Aid fixes for something that truly needs social surgery at the end of the day.
How about Medicare for all?
To be completely honest, I think the best Medicare for all is the preventative measures that I discussed earlier. As you compare the Western practice compared to Eastern practice. While in China, I did Tai Chi with the elders every morning and every evening in the park. None of them had circulatory issues. None of them were in wheelchairs. And it was as if they transitioned or aged youthfully. And that's something that I truly want to bring back, especially, again, given the demographic of elders that choose Florida to live. So we need to have public resources in place to serve those elders as they choose to live.
But there are always going to be people who are hereditarily predisposed to disease, regardless of how healthy their lifestyle is. I mean, there are people who have the BRCA gene that are going to be predisposed for breast cancer regardless. So should those people have access? Do they deserve the right to access to medicine? Is it a human right, or should it be the way that it is now and only provided if you have the money to pay for the insurance or the access to medical needs through your own financial resources? And that's what we talk about when we say like Medicare for all, making sure that everyone has access equally, regardless of your socioeconomic class, to medical care. And if it means preventative, that might mean preventative. A lot of insurance companies are pushing preventative medicine now, just because it helps them in the long run.
Yes, ma'am.
So do you believe in...
Yes, I believe in the having the option available. I don't like the way it's currently being executed. For example, I've been relatively healthy, thank God, for my entire life. But I'm more likely to be approved because I don't have any pre-existing illnesses or pre-existing issues. But I feel as though someone that does have those pre-existing issues should have right before me. And the way that we play that how that whole industry functions is a little misleading to me. And I think, the first option would be Medicare for all and giving priority to individuals with pre-existing illnesses. I think it's just a money grab when you're taking resources from healthy people already.
Right. How about minimum wage and raising that? Is there a certain wage that you think minimum wage should be raised to? Is there a certain number? Do you think we should raise minimum wage? What are your thoughts on that?
That's going to require an algorithm. I think with the rate of inflation, we could raise it. Well, $15 was something that was discussed in the midterms. I don't think that will even be sufficient moving forward, again, as inflation continues to rise. My solution, again, is improving your educational and technical skills. So then at that point, you can negotiate your own wage. So again, I'm grateful that I attended Tampa Bay Technical High School. Within that, we had welding. My cousin, he has no degrees, but he makes well over $40 an hour as a welder, and I was only making 20 plus with 2 degrees as a programmer.
Sure.
So that would be my.
Well, that would kind of segue into my next question, because one of the reasons for that is because of workers' rights and unions. And nationwide, there's an attack on workers' rights and union busting. So would you say you're a proponent of union and dedicated to workers' rights, and that's something that you see as an attribute to our society?
Absolutely. And we wouldn't be where we are without those respective groups and those committed human resources, if you will.
How about gun reform? Where do you stand on gun reform?
I'm definitely a proponent for gun reform. My best friend, Levi Dixon Jr., was murdered.
I'm sorry.
In the summer of 2008. He was actually shot in the throat. He was a fellow singer. I met him at Orange Grove. And indirectly, I guess as a byproduct of that, I've began advocating or lobbying on gun reform to some extent. That being said, again, I think we've politicized it to an extent. The NRA has not shot anyone. But when we like to point the finger at that respective institution, I think, again, if we did more from the inclusive community standpoint, did more to engage in to improve social morale, to improve community connections and things of that nature, that would help reduce the instances of these shootings, and also help us identify individuals that may be more inclined or suffering from stress or depression in some capacity, just by civically engaging and inviting individuals out that may more so be socially isolated.
So you think that through inclusivity, we'll be able to help identify mental illness and help treat that, which might have an impact on some of the gun violence? Absolutely.
And even arts in particular reduce stress and anxiety. And if we can look from a budgetary basis and maybe even social, when we start to remove the fundings for art, maybe students start to bring guns into our schools. I wonder if there's a correlation there.
Okay. And then my next question would be it's a huge topic right now, immigration, right? And what people would say, pathways to immigration. And what I've asked mayoral candidates, because there are some cities, I've gotten conflicting information about whether they're allowed in Florida, but as mayor, some mayors have enacted sanctuary cities, to protect kind of the crisis of, attacking immigrants and deportation and villainizing immigrants right now. What would you say are your feelings towards kind of the immigration debate happening within our country?
Okay. Well, my sister's father migrated here from Colombia, Buenaventura. That being said, America wouldn't be America without migrants or immigrants for the most part, with the exception of the Africans that were enslaved.
Correct.
They're the only demographic that didn't come voluntarily. That being said,
and Native Americans. They didn't.
The indigenous, that were already here. But that being said, again, I think we're politicizing this and making it an issue to validate our argument. We're talking about individuals threatening certain jobs and things of that nature. But as you expressed, a lot of the immigrants that are coming to just improve their social status, if you will, aren't trying to come in and take our middle class jobs for the most part. They're willing to do things that most Americans won't commit to.
Right.
So I think Tampa is a sanctuary city, and
I was told it wasn't. As I said, I've gotten very misleading information.
I was going to say it's been articulated to be a sanctuary city, but I have seen the presence of our law enforcement surrounding integration in Tampa under my leadership. I would definitely consider maintaining the status as a sanctuary city, and also doing more to support those populations to ensure that they can assimilate to our culture in an easier capacity and help become a resident in a more formal capacity.
Awesome.
Yes, ma'am.
So one of the things that I've seen happening in the debate when we're talking about growing our city, both at the county level and at the city level, are as we grow, we encroach on some of our natural resources.
Absolutely.
And Florida's particularly known for offshore drilling and fracking. So a lot of members of our community are extra concerned about environmental rights. Give me a little feedback about how committed you are and what you see as far as environmental rights, specifically in our city when we're surrounded by so many natural resources that enhance, our day-to-day life and that are part of the tourist industry, how we can protect and focus on environmental rights within our city.
It's definitely going to require more comprehensive planning. When Florida became a state, the only expectation was to get rid of the indigenous. So again, the expectation was exclusivity. We didn't have a comprehensive plan as to what we wanted to do. We just knew we didn't want these individuals to have it. And I think through urban sprawl and the rapid development taking place in Brandon, Riverview, Ruskin area, things of that nature, we're seeing a byproduct of that same behavior. That being said, I'm definitely a proponent for historic preservation, as I expressed, and that would permit us to utilize the land that's already been developed, as opposed to continue to encroach on verdant land.
Would you think that if there was a fight between developers wanting to develop on wetlands or conserved lands, that you would side with saving our conservated lands, conservated lands? Is that the right word to describe that? Or do you think that it would be important to our economy to allow developers to continue developing, even if it's the cost at some of our natural resources?
I think we're getting a little pretentious in our need to just develop. That's just like saying, do you want an influx of income or have the ability to breathe?
Right.
Which is more pertinent. So I think we've gotten so focused on our positions and our ranking as cities as opposed to, again, the quality of life that's available there.
Awesome. Okay, so I've only got a couple questions left. You feeling the heat yet? So at the forefront, right, when you talk to a lot of city of Tampa municipal candidates, gentrification and affordable housing is at the forefront, right? Because as you talk about, we have a beautiful city and there should be a lot of restoration work that goes into that. And they're doing that, when it comes to Seminole Heights and expanding to Tampa Heights of the downtown area. But a lot of times with some of the restoration, revitalization, as it gentrifies, it pushes people who can't afford to live in communities that have been revitalized out. And we have an affordable housing crisis already. So as we gentrify, that just intensifies our affordable housing crisis. What do you see are some solutions to that?
Well, two things. Gentrification is kind of like the son or grandson of urban renewal. The expectation of urban renewal on the public as a politician, again, was to provide affordable housing. But in intimate meetings with developers at the time, it was actually synonymous with Negro removal. Mm-hmm. So again, here we're putting, my fellow opponents are offering their housing solutions, but the beginning of these issues are a little bit more deeper than we'd like to think. For example, the advent of deed restricted areas and housing associations were so to keep African Americans from living in certain developments. Mm-hmm. Fast forward, we had those limitations solely based off of racism, and now we've incorporated economics and banking, and now it's more so classism.
Sure.
At this point. So that being said, in order to truly make housing affordable, we'd have to look at the things that inflate the cost of it, different financing options. Where's the labor coming from? How are we obtaining the materials? Can they be achieved or received at a lower cost? Where are we obtaining the tools? And I think if we could, for example, some of the youth that are spending 21 days locked up in the juvenile justice center could be spending those 21 days getting apprenticeships and actually building and constructing on sites. So when they conclude with these 21 days of remediation, if you will, they at least have some type of technical skill or something to look forward to for the most part. So that could be one way of reducing the cost for labor. If we want to partner with Home Depot and Lowe's to develop some contractual agreement for our residents to purchase at a given volume, and it could be reduced at a given cost.
But what if it's just supply and demand? What if, as neighborhoods gentrify, people with more money want to live in those neighborhoods and they're willing to pay higher rent, and people who own those properties are going to maximize and move in people who are going to pay the most, and then people who have lived there can't afford to compete with that, so they're pushed out of the neighborhoods. How do we manage something like that?
Well, and that goes back to the educational piece. So I believe our median household income is around $50,000. So if I could invent something or go learn more about technology or create some applications that provide an external income, this again would maybe elevate the median income to 100,000. And again, at that point, you at least have more negotiating power. And that's the thing. In this global economy, we're trying to improve the individuals that are here, try to account for the growth to come while positioning and preparing to compete in a global economy. So there's so many different considerations that go into that whole conversation. And so my commitment to the city of Tampa residents, again, doing all I can to improve your talents, your skills, and your abilities so that you can improve your own share of wallet and have more negotiating power at that point in time.
I was wrong. I actually have two more questions. So one thing that I always ask candidates as they come on, and I find specifically people who talk about their faith throughout the interview is always a trickier question. But one of the things that's important to me, especially as an educator, is a separation between church and state.
Okay.
And as someone who's taught in a lot of Title I schools and marginalized communities, it is a little bit of a challenge for me because I've seen a lot of times in a lot of those communities, faith-based organizations come in and they fill the holes in a community model where a lot of other people who should be accountable have failed. And even actually in my neighborhood, I teach at a school locally, and today they were sending home food for kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch over the weekend. And I said, well, where is this coming from? Because I know that's not provided by Hillsborough County. And it was a local church here, Lutheran church, that has taken that responsibility. But at the same time, I worry as some of these faith-based organizations start to fill the hole and, fill the needs that we are failing to provide as a community, that one religion or pushing one religion over another becomes an issue. And that the point of separation between church and state is so that we don't have people who may not be of a religion that's more popular, or so we don't basically start to divide ourselves by religion, that state places or schools should be places where everyone of different religions can come and be treated equally. And that's why we separate it. So from a faith-based person, what it sounds like you talk about how you spoke to God when you were trying to figure out where you were going. How do you see the division of church and state as a mayor?
I think to an extent that expectation is kind of a byproduct of why we're having the issues that we are having. I know in earlier education, at least for Africans that were formerly enslaved, a lot of well, the only literature that you were transcribed came from the Bible and that knowledge that you got. That being said, I think a lot of the issues that are perceived to be social are somewhat spiritual. Like, for example, if I'm indifferent with God, or I feel indifferent about where I am, my relationship with God, it's going to be kind of difficult to treat someone or show someone a smile as I'm interacting with them. Like, that being said, I don't think having someone that believes in a particular faith system will be detrimental to education.
Well, like right now, there's a Democrat at the Florida legislation who's trying to propose a bill where there's mandatory Bible study in school. Right. Which for Christians might sound like a great idea. But for Muslims or Hindus or, students of a different religion, that is not necessarily something that makes sure that they feel included or that promotes inclusivity. So on something like that, where we're talking about mandating religious studies, not all religious studies, right? Because I love religious studies and I almost majored in religious studies. I think world religion is interesting, but pushing one over the other, right? So let's imagine it was a different culture and it was studying the Quran or any one text over the other. Do you feel like that's a conflict of interest when we're talking about separation of church and state?
Not necessarily. And for example, the Bible states, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you." By me imposing a particular religious expectation or imposing these ideas, it's not allowing you to seek ye first, if you get what I'm saying. That being said, I don't think that legislation is an absolute necessity. And I think it should be at someone's discretion whether or not they would like to partake.
What about teaching creationalism in school as opposed to evolution?
Can you clarify creationism?
So saying that as opposed to evolution, that we actually came from Adam and Eve, and that was the origin of human existence. Teaching that as science, as the way of the creation of the world, the biblical context, as opposed to the scientific approach that we have now, which is evolution and the Big Bang Theory.
That's very interesting.
We can ask another question if you need some time to think about that. Or
I think that can be at least helps provide some parameters, if you will. I think me being a student and learning science in the manner that I did, there was a level of ambiguity. And I think that will provide at least some preface.
So you like the idea of teaching creationalism?
I think at a younger age, that could definitely be more effective. And I think, again, from like the testing and the hypothesis and that basis, what we currently learn, I guess it already aligns with that because it's been curriculum for so long. That's a good question.
Well, let's talk about one that you probably have more to say on. Right. And I kind of saved it for the last because I feel like it's an underlying theme in a lot of things that we've talked about.
Okay.
So regardless of the candidate, I always ask about racial justice because it's something obviously the Progressive Caucus is passionate about. And it's a theme I keep hearing over and over again, right? That so many of our issues are created because of hurtful racist policy that have been left over from slavery and then the Jim Crow area. And it's just been Band-Aid upon Band-Aid. And we've gotten to where we are because so much of our policy was racist or misogynistic, meant to keep women down, or, aimed at keeping, marginalized communities marginalized. So for somebody who sounds like they're passionate about racial justice, what do you see that you could bring to the city in any capacity, policy-wise, to deal with whatever injustice you see most at the forefront of what Tampa's issues lie when it comes to racial justice?
I think the biggest dynamic or the biggest contrast that I see is the policing in East Tampa and the residents of East Tampa. That being said, I really stepped in and at least attempt to become an intermediary, and speaking to the police officers and articulating the concerns of the general public, while also understanding the demands of the police force, and the expectations that are placed on them at the same time. That being said, as I expressed to the former police chief Jane Castor in our meeting, there are innate disconnects that I can speak to that my fellow opponents can't, simply as a byproduct of not only being African American, but growing up in East Tampa in particular. That being said, one thing I've been talking to small businesses about, even from a food basis, I want to implement a soul food festival. All the candidates talk about how great our eateries are and things of that nature. And I think that's a cultural element that we can all commune around. And then the different expectation, even with that, is bringing in individuals more so holistic and from the healthier basis to help consult the soul food industries, if you will, as to how to make these things taste better for you. And then the individuals with the background in soul food, if you will, teach healthier individuals how to possibly make things taste better. So it's a knowledge sharing experience. We're communing together around the food and hopefully learning something in the process. And again, I think just civic engagement measures that permit us to at least highlight the resources that are currently there will help gain the economic foot traffic to support new industries that could be produced at that point. As far as like racial and social justice,
what about criminal justice reform in general? And
the term that they've been throwing around is social justice, and the subset is that is criminal and racial. Much like Andrew Gillum and something that he had enacted while he was mayor of Tallahassee, I've been preparing this plan for an idea called the accountability suite, where the mayor of the most challenging district, East Tampa, would head a representative from the mayor's office and a representative from the law, as well as 4 community keepers from North, South, East, and West Tampa. And we have first-time offenders, petty offenders come before this accountability suite, as we brand it, to more so buffer and reduce recidivism in that capacity, to refrain from ever one being impacted by the system altogether. And I think, again, by developing programs and initiatives with that expectation in mind, that's going to help remediate those things.
Do you think that you would feel that, especially like TPD, Tampa Police Department, needs to reevaluate their training methods when it comes to how they handle criminal justice? Do you think police training contributes to some of the issues that we see now?
Absolutely. And definitely their perception at the same time. I've spoken to many different individuals, retired and current members of the force. And it's just, it's just ingrained. And it may even just be in fear. Like, it's ingrained to be cautious or cognizant, and I don't think that's necessary. You're a public servant for the most part, and I think if we did more to reinforce the presence as, again, public servants and police officers would be more favorable than law enforcers per se, and that's more so how it's received. I myself have actually been stopped 2 times in this mayoral process. Once for running a red light, running a stop sign, but I didn't run the stop sign, but I crossed the white line. But next time, don't cross the white line. And at the conclusion of that stop, there were 4 officers surrounding me for stop sign, as opposed to. And I asked, "Do you stop everyone that runs that go over the white line?" And obviously not. So
they said no. What was their answer when you asked them that question?
I have a video actually on the phone. I can leave it with you of the whole exchange. I'll just say it went from, "Are there any drugs to the car?" to, "Oh, you're who? Sorry, sir. Have a good night."
Interesting.
That's what I will say that. And it's unfortunate because not many individuals are in my position at this point to at least begin working on a more favorable relationship with the police force. So
Do you think in the vein of like community modeled schools that community policing, where we're making sure that the officers that we're signing to different neighborhoods actually live and work in those communities so they have more accountability and relationships with the members, might be a solution to some of the issues that we see in criminal justice reform?
That's a step. So, for example, while canvassing and knocking those 3,000 doors, if I'm an officer and I grew up in Riverview and I'm stationed in East Tampa now, and I now moved to East Tampa, if I choose to, again, be receptive to my general public, that's going to determine, again, the quality of that relationship. But I just sit in my apartment and watch everything from the ring. The camera then is just as ineffective of you being or doing as they're currently doing at the same time.
So you think community policing is a good idea?
It could be. Again, depending upon the receptivity of that particular officer.
Of the officer.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of in a wrap up, and then I'll give you an opportunity to discuss anything that we might have missed. One of the things I think is interesting is obviously you're one of the younger candidates, if not the youngest.
Yes, ma'am.
And I've had a few younger candidates on my show. One of my candidates was 17 and running for school board. And some of the feedback that I've gotten is that as a younger candidate, you know, being a younger person, especially like within the Democratic Party, I don't know much about the Republican Party, but they're always like, we need young people and we need their voices and we need them in leadership. But when younger people actually try to run and they, you know, do what people are saying, oh, we need your voices, they get told, oh, you don't have enough experience, or your age is used against you, or you need to pay your dues before you can do something like that. Is that something that you feel like you've experienced as one of the younger candidates in the race?
Absolutely. It's kind of like a wait your turn or know your place type of thing. But again, electing off the same basis and expecting different outcomes is the definition of insanity. Not to mention, we stop at diversity just from the physical aesthetic and the appearance, but diversity can also come from different age ranges and different technical backgrounds as well.
Sure.
So we don't need all politicians to come from public administration, to come from law. We need more variety of perspectives, and that's what's going to permit us to come up with the most objective policies moving forward. I believe majority of politicians are over the age of 55. Majority are Caucasian males. And so given the law of relativity, we're going to continue to derive the same outcomes unless we diversify.
And you mentioned Andrew Gillum. Would you say that he's someone that you model some of your policies or inspired you in some way, since he was one of the, if not the youngest mayor in Florida? In Gainesville? I'm
not sure if that's the case. I didn't even meet him until last year. But one thing, I was actually headed to the Capitol for Rights Restoration Day last January, and
or Tallahassee. He was the mayor of Tallahassee.
Mayor of Tallahassee. Yeah.
I said Gainesville.
It's fair. Yeah, and on my commute there, Andrew Gillum was on the Breakfast Club, and this was actually the first time I'd ever heard him speak. And he has a similar initiative to the Accountability Suite in Tallahassee that he enacted called Community Connections. And hearing him describe like the impact of the program and that initiative actually gave me chills. Like, hey, kid, you're on the right track. So I wouldn't say that there's one particular individual that inspires me per se. I will say that I'm seeking confirmation and not compensation. So a lot of things and a lot of individuals that I come in contact with really affirm that I'm making the right decision and moving in the right direction.
Now, for some reason, you know, this doesn't work out. Are we going to see more runs from you? Are you committed to politics and leadership in general in the Tampa Bay area?
I won't say that I won't. I will say that I've had other opportunities come available. I've been offered opportunities to develop in India, Africa, as well as the Caribbean. To be completely honest, I've consulted Harvard graduates now, and they honestly compared me and said that I'm more qualified than the current mayor. So I may become a political consultant to some extent, but as I stated, Aristotle said, where your talents and the needs of the earth lie, there lies your vocation. So in 4 years, I may have new talents, and the demand for my presence may be elsewhere.
Gotcha.
And prayerfully, Tampa is able to make the best decision to optimize the outcomes moving forward.
Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed our interview. It's been very interesting, and I've loved getting to know you. Is there anything that you want to say that we haven't talked about in regards to your mayoral campaign or run?
Nothing in particular. I want to say thank you for having me on and even considering me.
Absolutely.
As I stated with the name, it's very powerful. I think very effective.
Well, we kind of share a name. I'm Jessica Vaughn, and you're LaVaughn.
Absolutely. So that's a little confirmation there.
And it's spelled the same too. All right. Well, I think that this has been extremely eye-opening. One thing I always like to do is give the candidates, for anyone who feels extremely passionate or wants to help your campaign, an opportunity to do that. So if people want to get involved, tell me how they can do that and what you need.
Alrighty. So basically, I would love for more individuals to come on board to help what we've branded as the street team. Mm-hmm. We'll be tackling North, South, East, and West Tampa, making an initial sweep, basically surveying the general public.
Canvassing
about their expectations of leadership, utilizing that information to help finalize a plan.
Awesome.
And then we'll be hosting more town halls so that we can go over the plan that's being developed to see if anything needs to be further changed or modified. Also try to triage the expectations of the public as well and try to get an overall consensus.
So you're being reflective in your campaign.
Absolutely. You can follow at iLead2019 on Instagram.
Can you spell that for me?
At ILEAD 2019. As well as on Facebook, LaVaughn King mayoral candidate. That's my page. It also has a number where I can be reached, 813-355-9569. If you have any skill sets that you think could be useful throughout the course of this process, or simply would like to offer any suggestions, feel free to reach out to me. My personal email is lvrkge@gmail.com. And we're corresponding for the campaign through iLead2019@gmail.com.
And what about if people want to give you money?
Basically, you're currently running a $5 fundraiser utilizing Cash App. So it's iLead2019. Upon clearing a certain threshold, we will the website will go public. And at that point, you'll be able to give whatever figure you'd like. But specifically, we'll be asking for $100 to employ a volunteer, $300 to employ the vision, or $500 to employ a youth.
So you have different tiers.
Absolutely. And so each $500 contribution will go to employing one youth in our community for 50 hours.
Great. Well, I wish you the best of luck. As I've mentioned, I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a great pleasure in talking with you. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another edition. Again, my name is Jessica Vaughn. I've been speaking with LaVaughn King, who is a mayoral candidate for the March 5th election, City of Tampa elections, which unfortunately you have to live inside the city limits to participate in. If you're confused about that, check your utility bill. If you're paying the City of Tampa, that's a good indication that you live within the city limits. If you have any questions for our show or any comments or feedback, you can always email me at jvaughn, V as in Victor, AUGHN, the number 30 @gmail.com. And as always, thank you for listening. This has been Reclaiming My Mind.